We closed on the house on a Friday in April. My wife and I had been looking for 14 months. 14 months of open houses and offers, and the particular exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment that a competitive housing market produces. When we finally got this house, a 4-bedroom colonial in a Columbus suburb, we felt like we had won something. We celebrated on the driveway with a bottle of champagne we had been saving. We were that happy. We moved in 2 weekends later. The previous owners, a couple who had lived in the house for 11 years, had been present at closing. Friendly, emotional about leaving in the way people are when a house has held a significant portion of their lives. They had left us a handwritten note on the kitchen counter with useful information, the name of their HVAC company, the recycling pickup schedule, the garage door code. A genuinely kind gesture. What they did not leave, and what I did not think to ask for, was certainty about who else had keys. We did not rekey the locks immediately. I want to say that clearly because I think it is the most important mistake in this story. We were busy with the move. We told ourselves we would get to it. We told ourselves the previous owners were trustworthy. They had been so warm at closing, had written the note, had left us the garage code. We told ourselves we would get to it. 3 weeks after we moved in, a Monday in May, my wife was working from home. She was in the upstairs office when she heard a sound downstairs. The house was otherwise empty. I was at work and the kids were at school. She heard a door. The specific sound of a door that knows the house, not the sound of someone forcing entry, not a break-in. The sound of a key in a lock, and a door opening the way it opens for someone who has opened it thousands of times before. She said she knew in the first second that it was not a sound that belonged to her new life in this house. She locked the office door and called 911. She whispered the address and what she had heard and stayed in that office. The person who came through the front door moved through the house. She could track the sounds, unhurried and confident. The kitchen, the living room, the basement door opened. A minute later, the basement door again. Footsteps back through the house. The front door. A car starting. Officers arrived 4 minutes later. The house was empty, but in the basement, on shelving we had not yet filled, they found a box sealed with the previous owner's name on it. Financial records, photographs, items that held personal value. Items they had come back for. Using a key they still had, while my wife sat alone in our new house. Without telling us, without asking, without any awareness of or concern for the terror their return produced in the woman on the second floor who did not know who was in her house. The previous owners were located and interviewed by Columbus PD. They were genuinely mortified. They had a key, they knew the house, they needed the box. To them it felt like returning to their own home. To my wife it was a stranger moving through her house. They were not charged since it was a civil matter with legal complexity, given the transition period. But the detective said something in the follow-up call that I want to give to every person who has ever bought a house or ever will. He said to rekey on day 1. Not week 3, not when you get around to it. Day 1, before you sleep in that house. The previous owner, their family, the dog walker with a spare, the cleaning service with an extra copy, the neighbor given one for emergencies 5 years ago. You cannot know who has a key. The only solution is a new lock. Day 1. Before your first night. Before the champagne is finished. Before the boxes are opened. Rekey the locks. The house was built in 1941. I knew that going in. I am someone who appreciates old houses, the construction, the details, the bones of a building made before shortcuts were standard. I had bought and renovated a house before and knew what an old house required. I was not intimidated. I bought the Pittsburgh house because the price was right, the bones were good, and I had a plan. What I did not have, and what no one who buys an old house fully has, was knowledge of everything that 80 years of ownership had produced. The modifications, the repairs, the things done by someone 30 years ago for reasons nobody living can explain. I moved in and began the renovation. In the second month, I started work on the basement. The basement of a 1941 Pittsburgh row house is a specific space, low ceiling, rubble stone foundation, a sealed coal chute, a sump pump added sometime in the 70s, and a crawl space, a secondary area beneath a portion of the basement accessed through a low door in the back wall. The kind of space that held old pipes, original wiring long since replaced, the mechanical infrastructure of a house built before modern building practices. I had not gone into the crawl space in 2 months of living there. I had noted it as a space to address and put it on the list. On a Saturday in November, I put on coveralls and a headlamp and went in. The floor was bare earth. Old pipes ran along the joists above me. I was about 20 feet in when my headlamp swept across something that stopped me completely. A section of the crawl space had been altered. Not recently and not by me. Someone had framed out a defined interior space within the space. Built walls created an 8-by-6-foot room with a low door. A door latched from the outside. I backed out. I went upstairs and called 911. 2 officers came and went into the crawl space with me. They opened the door. The interior was empty, no current occupant. But investigators who came subsequently spent significant time in it. The framed walls were old, decades old, built into the house at some point in its history. The floor of the space had been, the investigator used the word maintained. Used, cleaned, reused over a period of time the construction and evidence suggested was significant. What the space had been used for involved the house's history going back decades and people who were no longer living, and I will leave the specifics to your imagination. The detective said old houses hold things, not metaphorically, literally, things built in during other eras by other people for purposes that belong to those people. When you buy an old house, you inherit not just the structure, but the history of every decision made in it. Some of those decisions were ordinary, some were not, and the house does not disclose which is which. The crawl space, the attic, the locked room, the modification that does not make sense, those are the places the history lives. Go into all of them. Before you move in, before you sleep in it. Know what your house is holding before it shows you later on your hands and knees in the dark. The house was brand new. I want to emphasize that because it changes the usual assumptions. No previous owners, no previous tenants, no one who had keys before me. A new build in a Phoenix development, the kind of neighborhood where every house looks like a variation of the same template. The landscaping is still young, and the streets have that specific quality of places where everyone is new at the same time. I moved in March. I rekeyed my locks anyway because I had learned that lesson from a previous experience, and because the construction crew had master keys during the build, and I did not know how many copies existed. My immediate neighbors to the left moved in 2 weeks after I did. A couple in their mid-30s, friendly in the way of people who are also new and building their new normal alongside you. We waved, introduced ourselves, had the brief warm exchanges of neighbors who are not yet friends, but are becoming the landscape of each other's lives. The house to my right remained empty for 3 months. In June, a man moved in alone. Mid-40s, introduced himself as Paul, also friendly, also new. The 3 of us were the original occupants of what would become a larger neighborhood as the development filled in. For the first 2 months, Paul seemed fine. The first thing I noticed was the hours. His lights went on and off at times that did not correspond to a normal schedule. On at 3 in the morning, off at 5, back on at noon. I told myself shift work, insomnia, a dozen things that accommodated the observation. The second thing was his interest in my schedule. Casual questions that accumulated. What time I usually left for work, whether I worked from home, whether I had family visiting often. Questions that individually were neighborly small talk, but accumulated as a map of my availability and absence. The third thing was what moved me from noticing to acting. A camera. Paul's doorbell camera, which he had installed within his first 2 weeks. I noticed one afternoon at an angle from my driveway that let me see his front door clearly. His camera was not pointing at his door. It was angled toward my driveway and my front door. I took a dated photograph of the angle and called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line. I described what I had observed, the schedule, the questions, the camera angle. The officer asked for both addresses, went quiet for a moment, and then said he needed to transfer me to a detective. The detective had been working a case involving a man who had been systematically targeting newly occupied homes in developing neighborhoods, presenting as a friendly new neighbor, building familiarity and schedule knowledge over weeks. Paul's name connected to a prior incident in a different development. A woman who had moved in alone, whose story I was not given in full, but whose outcome informed how quickly the detective moved. Paul was arrested within 48 hours. The improperly aimed camera provided probable cause alongside the prior incident information. The detective said the camera angle photograph was the right thing to document, that it was now in the file, and the file had been waiting for it. He said new developments were targeted specifically because everyone was new and nobody knew who belonged. The friendly new neighbor read as normal, because strangers being friendly was the environment. The cover was built in. He said I had trusted my red anyway. That made the difference. The property was 12 acres. I want to tell you about the 12 acres before I tell you about the house, because the way I thought about this purchase, house first and land second, is exactly the thinking that led to what happened. I was excited about the house. A restored farmhouse in rural Tennessee, renovated kitchen, original hardwood floors, a porch that ran the full length of the front and caught the afternoon light. I was excited about the house. The 12 acres, I thought about the way most buyers think about land they are not farming. As space, as privacy, as a buffer. I did not think about them as 12 acres with a history, with structures beyond the house. A barn, a small equipment shed, a detached garage, and a secondary structure at the back of the property the listing described as a storage outbuilding that I had seen only in photographs. I had not walked to it before closing. I had not inspected it. I assumed it was what it was described as. I moved in on a Saturday. On Sunday I walked the property for the first time. The barn was locked but accessible with the keys from closing. The equipment shed was empty and clean. The detached garage held items the previous owner had agreed to clear within 30 days. And the back outbuilding, I walked to it across the rear acreage, 150 yards from the house, far enough that I could not hear anything from the house, and the house could not hear me. 16 by 20 feet, wooden construction, one window boarded from the outside, one door with a padlock. The keys from closing did not include a key for this padlock. I called the previous owner's number. No answer. I called their realtor, who said all keys had been provided at closing. I said there was a padlocked outbuilding on my property that I could not access. She said she would try to reach the previous owner. I went back to the house. I did not sleep well that night, not because I was afraid specifically, but because I do not sleep well knowing there is a locked space on my property I cannot open. In the morning no one had called. I called a locksmith. He examined the padlock and said it was a quality lock, installed recently. Within the last year, he estimated. The hasp knew as well. He said it had been put on deliberately by someone who wanted this locked seriously. He opened it. The interior was dim. The locksmith stepped back and said he thought I should call the police before going further. I looked past him. The interior had been fitted. Shelving along the walls, a workbench, items arranged with the organization of someone who used this space regularly. Not old items, current items. The kind of arrangement that belongs to someone's ongoing life, not to a storage outbuilding of a property sold 3 weeks earlier. I called 911. Officers came and processed the building. The outbuilding had been used as a living space by an individual who was not the previous owner, who had accessed the rear of the property through a gap in the back fence line abutting state land, without the previous owner's knowledge, and had been using the building for an extended period. The previous owner, when finally reached, was as shocked as I was. They had not accessed the back outbuilding in the last year of their ownership. They did not have a key for the padlock. Whoever had been living there had installed their own lock with their own key. A building on my property, their space, a lock neither the previous owner nor I could open. The detective said to walk everything before closing. Not just the house, every structure, every locked door. If you cannot open a lock on a property you are about to own, do not close until you can. Demand access to every building on that acreage. Because after you close, whatever is in those buildings is yours to deal with. The contract makes it your property. The padlock makes it their space. Walk everything before closing. Every building, every locked door, every structure on the land. Do not close on a property with a door you cannot open. What is behind that door, once you own the property, is yours to find. Make sure you find it before you sign.